For years, they called me the rebel. They told my cousins I was a worldly influence and that my voice was something to be feared. But while the world was watching a scripted reality show about 19 kids and counting, I was watching a slow motion car crash of control manipulation and broken spirits. For a decade, I stayed quiet to protect the girls I love, but last night the silence finally shattered. My phone lit up at 3:14 a.m., a frantic private number. When I picked up, all I heard was the sound of heavy rain and the terrified, shaking breath of a girl who had just risked everything. Amy, she whispered, we're outside. We crossed the fence. Please don't let him find us. At that moment, I knew the lost girls weren't lost anymore. They were running. I'm Amy King, and tonight I am breaking every NDA and every family rule to tell you the truth that Jim Bob Duggar is desperate to bury. This isn't just a story about a midnight escape, it's an expose on the empire that tried to own them. Grab your headphones because for the next 70 minutes, the rebel cousin is finally taking the mic and I'm bringing the receipts. I didn't even stop to put on real shoes. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and drove toward the compound like my life depended on it. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise. You have to understand the big house isn't just a home, it's a fortress. It has cameras, high fences, and eyes everywhere. I kept thinking about what would happen if my uncle caught them. And in that family, disobedience isn't just a mistake, it's a spiritual crime. As I pulled onto the shoulder of the road a half mile from the gate, I saw two small shadows huddled under a tree. They were soaked to the bone, shivering, clutching backpacks like they were life rafts. When they saw my car, they didn't just walk, they lunged for the door. The moment I heard the locks click shut, the air in the car changed. It smelled like wet grass, cheap laundry detergent, and pure, unadulterated terror. I didn't take them back to my house. That's the first place Jim Bob would look. I drove 3 towns over to a small, nondescript motel and paid cash. I didn't want a paper trail and I didn't want GPS pings. Once we got into the room, I just sat on the edge of the bed and watched them. These weren't the lost girls the media talked about. These were human beings who had just realized they were finally outside the cage. The first thing Johannah said wasn't, "Thank you," or "I'm scared." She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, and asked, "Amy, do we have to go back for church on Sunday?" That broke me. They had just escaped a multi-million-dollar compound in the middle of a storm, and their biggest fear was the mandatory performance of keeping sweet. I promised them right then and there, nobody was going back. Not today, not Sunday, not ever. By 4:30 a.m., the silence of the night was shattered by my own phone. I saw the caller ID and my stomach did a somersault. It was my uncle. He didn't sound worried or like a grieving father whose daughters were missing. He sounded like a CEO whose warehouse had been robbed. He didn't ask if they were safe. He asked, "Amy, do you have them?" I didn't lie. I've spent my whole life being told to be a good girl and respect my elders. But that version of Amy died the moment I saw those girls shivering in the rain. I told him, "They are safe. They are with me. And if you or any of your sons come within a mile of us, the next call I make isn't to you, it's to the press." The line went dead. That was the moment the war officially started. He knew I didn't care about his NDAs or his authority. I was the one person he couldn't control with money or guilt. As the sun started to come up, the girls finally opened their backpacks. I expected to see clothes or maybe some mementos. Instead, they had packed their journals, years of handwritten notes documenting the rules, the punishments, and the suffocating pressure of being a Duggar daughter in 2026. They had also packed a small digital recorder they'd hidden under a floorboard for months. They hadn't just run away. They had spent a year gathering evidence. They knew that in our family, your word is worth nothing unless you have proof. Seeing those journals made me realize this wasn't just a rebellious whim. This was a calculated, desperate move for survival. They had been watching Jill and Jinger find their voices, and they decided they weren't going to wait until they were married off to find theirs. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with legal counsel. I knew how the Duggar machine worked. They would try to claim the girls were kidnapped or unstable. I had to move fast. I called Jill and Derek, and we started coordinate a plan to get them legal protection. The dynamic was shifting. The family that once owned the narrative was now scrambling to hide the truth. For years, the public saw the big house as a place of blessing and many children, but tonight the world is going to see it for what it truly is, a gilded cage where the door finally got kicked open. My name is Amy King, and I'm just getting started. If you think the first 10 years of this family were a scandal, you haven't seen anything yet. By 900 a.m., the motel parking lot didn't feel safe anymore. I knew my uncle had trackers on most of the family vehicles, and even though I'd switch cars with a friend, the paranoia was real. Derek Dillard, who has been our legal anchor through all this family chaos, told me to stay put while he filed emergency protective orders. Jim Bob's lawyers were already calling the local sheriff, trying to claim that I had manipulated two vulnerable young women into leaving. That's his favorite word, manipulated. He can't wrap his head around the fact that his daughters have their own brains. They didn't need me to talk them into leaving. They just needed me to be the one to pick up the phone when they finally had the courage to jump. While the lawyers were battling it out, I started reading the first few pages of Johannah's journal. It was heartbreaking. She described the atmosphere in the big house after Jill's book, Counting the Cost, came out. She said the modesty rules didn't just stay the same, they got stricter. The internet was cut off. Their phones were checked every single night. And they were forced to attend re-education sessions where they had to listen to tapes of Jim Bob preaching about the dangers of the outside world. They weren't being raised, they were being prepared for a life of total isolation. They saw what happened to Jill, how she was cut off and vilified, and it terrified them. But eventually, that terror turned into a burning need to know the truth for themselves. Then we listened to the first recording on that digital device. It was a conversation in the kitchen, recorded late at night. You could hear the clinking of glasses and Jim Bob's voice, not the soft, rehearsed tone he uses for the cameras, but something cold and calculating. He was talking to Michelle about asset protection. He was literally discussing the daughters as if they were pieces of real estate, planning who they would marry off to which loyalist family to ensure the Duggar brand stayed intact. He spoke about their futures like a business merger. Hearing him talk about his own flesh and blood in such a clinical, transactional way made my stomach turn. It was the smoking gun. We needed to prove that their lives were being bartered for the sake of a crumbling empire. As the morning went on, the messages from the loyalist camp started flooding in. My phone was vibrating off the table. It was the older brothers, the ones who are still on the payroll, calling me a snake and a home wrecker. They sent videos of Michelle crying, telling the girls to come home to the umbrella of protection. It was a masterclass in emotional blackmail. But then a few silent messages came through from people I didn't expect. One of the sisters in law sent a single heart emoji. Another cousin sent a link to a secure bank account with a small donation for gas and food. Even within the inner circle, the cracks are showing. People are tired of the lies, but most are too afraid of losing their housing or their income to speak up. By noon, we realized we couldn't stay in hiding forever. The kidnapping. Rumors were already hitting the gossip blogs, likely leaked by the Duggar PR team to discredit me. We had to take control of the narrative. I looked at Johannah and Jennifer and asked them if they were ready. I told them, the moment we go public, there is no going back. You will lose the only home you've ever known. They didn't even hesitate. They looked at each other, then at me, and said, "We lost that home a long time ago, Amy. We just want to be free." So we set up a ring light, opened my laptop, and hit record on the first real, unedited interview they have ever given in their entire lives. The world thinks they know the Duggars, but they are about to find out that the reality show was the only thing that wasn't real. Recording that first interview was surreal. I've been on TV sets my whole life, but there were no producers here telling us where to stand or what to say. It was just a grainy laptop camera and two girls who were finally allowed to speak. When Johannah started talking about the contract Jim Bob made them sign on their 18th birthdays, my jaw hit the floor. She described how they were forced to sign away their life rights to the family brand in exchange for a roof over their heads. It wasn't a choice, it was a ransom. If they didn't sign, they were told they were rebelling against God's authority and would be cast out with nothing. They were essentially employees in their own home, but with no salary and no human rights. Then we got into the recordings they brought. One clip specifically was from a family meeting held just 2 weeks ago. You can hear Jim Bob's voice booming across the room, telling the girls that their value in the eyes of the ministry was directly tied to their purity and their silence. He actually said, if you speak against this house, you are speaking against the Lord, and I will treat you as an infidel. The psychological warfare was staggering. He wasn't just their dad, he was their judge and executioner. Jennifer started crying as we played it back, remembering how she had to sit there and nod while her father threatened her future. They weren't just running from a house, they were running from a cult that used their own faith as a weapon to keep them in line. We decided to leak a 30-second teaser of that recording on my Instagram and TikTok. Within 10 minutes, the internet went into a total meltdown. The Duggar hashtag was trending worldwide. People couldn't believe the coldness in Jim Bob's voice. The PR team at the big house tried to issue a statement saying the audio was generated or maliciously edited, but the public wasn't buying it this time. You can't fake that kind of raw family specific trauma. The lost girls were suddenly the most famous women in America. And for the first time, Jim Bob couldn't use a TLC contract to shut them up. He had lost control of the one thing he valued most, the story. By late afternoon, Jim Bob's legal team tried a desperate move. They filed for an emergency wellness check and attempted to claim the girls were being held against their will by A hostile family member? Me. The police actually showed up at the motel. I felt my heart drop into my shoes when I saw the cruisers in the parking lot. I thought, this is it. He's going to use the law to drag them back. But here's the thing, Johannah is an adult. She's over 18. And Jennifer had Jill and Derek standing by with a temporary guardianship petition ready to go. When the officers spoke to the girls, Johannah looked them dead in the eye and said, I am not kidnapped. I am finally awake. And I am never going back to that house. The police left, and Jim Bob's power move blew up in his face. The most powerful moment of the entire day was when Jill and Ginger joined our secure Zoom call. Seeing the four of them, the sisters who had been through the fire, all on one screen was historic. Jill, who had been the pioneer of this rebellion, was just nodding and saying, I know, as the younger girls detailed the latest rules. Ginger spoke about the fear-based theology that had kept them trapped for so long. It was like a support group for survivors of a war zone. At one point, Ginger looked at the girls and said, the world is big and it's beautiful, and God is much kinder than Dad ever told you. That was the moment I saw the first real, genuine smile on Jennifer's face. The big house was finally losing its grip, one daughter at a time. By the time the sun went down on that first day, the big house had gone into total digital lockdown. No more staged photos of tater tot casseroles, no more fake smiles on the porch. Jim Bob's first move wasn't to apologize, it was to retaliate. He tried to have my personal bank accounts frozen, claiming I was using family-derived assets to fund a kidnapping. Can you believe the nerve of this man? He truly believes that any money anyone in this family has belongs to him by divine right. But I had been preparing for this for years. I knew his playbook. My accounts were secure, and for the first time in history, the Duggar money machine couldn't buy silence. The girls were sitting in that motel room, eating pizza, something they usually had to ask permission for, and watching the empire they grew up in start to burn on the evening news. People always ask me about Michelle. Does she know? Is she a victim too? Listen, I've lived this for decades. Michelle Duggar isn't just a bystander, she is the enforcer. In the journals the girls brought, they described how Michelle would be the one to pull them aside after a rebellion and use scripture to shame them until they couldn't stop crying. She was the one who taught them that their only value was in being a wife and a mother to as many children as possible. Seeing her on the news that night, looking frail and distraught, didn't make me feel sorry for her. It made me angry. She had so many chances to protect those girls, to stand up to Jim Bob, but she chose the umbrella of authority over her own daughter's safety. She chose the brand over the blood. As we dug deeper into the physical evidence they brought out in those backpacks, we found the lot ledgers. Most of you know about the family's car business, but you don't know the half of it. The girls had found documents showing how Jim Bob was using the car lots to clean the money from their various media deals so it wouldn't show up on their personal tax returns. It was a massive shell game. They were teenagers being told they were volunteering for the ministry while their names were being used on titles and bank wires they didn't even know existed. One of the papers showed a six-figure transfer in Johannah's name from a production company that she never saw a dime of. This wasn't just a strict upbringing. This was systematic financial exploitation of minors on a federal scale. The panic from the loyalists brothers, the ones who still have their names on Jim Bob's real estate deeds, was reaching a fever pitch. I started getting cease and desist letters from my own cousins, Jed and Jur, the ones who have tried so hard to follow in their father's political footsteps, were terrified if the girls testified about the financial coercion, the brothers' entire livelihoods would vanish. Their houses, their cars, the very ground they stand on is owned by Jim Bob. They aren't just defending their father, they are defending their own paychecks. It's a sad, twisted realization when you see that a family's unity is actually just a series of interconnected debt obligations. They didn't care that their sisters were safe, they only cared if the IRS was listening. The day ended with a phone call that changed everything. It wasn't from a lawyer or a news outlet. It was from a federal investigator. They had seen the leaked audio and they wanted to know if the girls were willing to hand over the digital recorder. I looked at Johannah and Jennifer. This was the point of no return. Handing that over meant this was no longer a family squabble or a YouTube expose. It was a criminal investigation. They didn't hesitate. They stood up, grabbed the device, and Johannah said, "Tell them we have a lot more than just that one recording." That was the moment I knew. The 2026 grand jury wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was an inevitability. The rebel cousin and the lost girls had just handed the government the keys to the big house. As I sit here today, the big house is no longer the center of the universe. The 2026 trial is moving forward and the evidence is overwhelming. Jim Bob's empire wasn't brought down by a rival business or a political enemy. It was brought down by the very daughters he tried to silence. He built a fortress of protection, but he forgot that if you make a house a prison, eventually the prisoners will find the key. Michelle is reportedly in seclusion, and the Loyalist brothers are facing a mountain of IRS audits that no family prayer circle can fix. The girls are safe now. They have their own apartments, their own bank accounts, and most importantly, their own voices. The first time I saw them buy a pair of jeans without asking for permission, I cried. It's the small things, the ability to choose your own path, your own faith, and your own friends that Jim Bob tried to steal. But you can't steal a soul that is determined to be free. To those still inside the umbrella of protection, whether you're a Duggar or anyone else trapped in a cycle of control, look for the light. The fences are high, but they aren't impossible. There is a whole world out here waiting to welcome you, not because of your last name or your purity, but because you are a human being with a right to breathe. I'm Amy King. For years, I was the rebel cousin who didn't fit the mold. Today, I'm the woman who helped the lost girls find their way home. The truth is out, the receipts are filed, and the era of the Duggar dynasty is officially over. The silence has been broken, and let me tell you, it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard.